Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome on into the Rooted Podcast. Tim Strombo coming to you from our Rooted Podcast production studios out here in beautiful Denver, Colorado. Thanks again, by the way, for being with us, be it on iTunes, SoundCloud, or the host website, stayrooted.com. We're thrilled to have you with us, and Happy New Year to you. We are very pumped for this next year of podcast, as well as producing more and more TV episodes for Rooted TV, which of course airs through our awesome partners over at Cannabis Club TV. Big shout out to them, but also now through High Times TV. So be sure to check them out at High Times TV. If you haven't already, we always include a snippet of these podcasts inside of our TV show, little interview preview for you. So be sure to check out High Times TV or Cannabis Club TV or stayrooted.com for those episodes as well. Also be sure to check out these full video episodes. We started doing these at the end of 2018 and people really dug it on our YouTube channel, also on the podcast listing on our website, again at stayrooted.com. Okay, so earlier, just a couple seconds ago, spilled the beans on the High Times TV announcement. Very excited about that. If you listened to the last show, you'll also remember that we'll be hitting the road a little bit here in 2019 with some on-location podcasts and video interviews. So we'll have more cool announcements in addition to those two down the road, so stay tuned. Okay, an interesting show for you today as we're going to be getting a little bit nerdy. Okay, going to get a little bit nerdy. We're going to talk about some technology, some new amazing technology that could greatly impact the idea of safe cannabis consumption around the world, really. I mean, I know that seems like a big statement, but if you pay attention to the cannabis space, then you saw what happened in California at the end of 2018 with the cannabis lab testing scandal, where, you know, there were rogue employees basically giving false approvals of cannabis flower that was then sent to market when it wasn't approved for testing or by testing. So it happens. So what if I told you that this new technology could basically guarantee 100% of your flower that passes through these dispensaries, that passes through these cultivation facilities, is clean and would pass the most strict regulatory lab testing standards? I mean, you as a consumer, then you would know when buying a specific brand who uses this technology, your flower is absolutely safe for consumption. What kind of peace of mind would that be worth to you? I mean, that sounds priceless to me. How about other microbials tracked into your, excuse me, I'll edit that out. Just kidding. Leave it in. The podcast is live. How about as a cultivator? What is this idea worth to you? The idea of not losing a harvest to mold or other microbials. You know, maybe you have an employee who tracked in mold or microbials into your grow, you know, or you had weather conditions or an AC breakdown, things beyond your control. Anyone who's ever grown cannabis can tell you what a tough process it is. And these factors, these outside factors, are not always inside of your realm of control. Okay, I mean, not only that. Okay, so we have the remediation side. We'll talk about that in just a second. A piece of technology that allows you to infuse terpenes and create custom, maybe even proprietary flavor profiles for your business, or rehydrate flower that you've accidentally allowed to become too dry. I know that seems like a lot for one piece of technology to say it can do, but that is why I went out and got this guy. I met him at MJ Biz in Vegas a short while ago, really intrigued by the product. We had him on a previous podcast when we did our live podcast out at MJ Biz. You can scroll back in our podcast catalog and catch some of those and definitely get a first taste of that technology. But we're going to dive into it today, and it's going to be stuff you're really going to want to know about. So make sure you're paying attention, okay? We're about to welcome in Alan Novotny, CEO of Purogen. They're the creators of the box, this device which claims it can do all of this stuff. So we're going to talk about how that can happen. I have a ton of questions for Alan, and we even went out, put some stuff on social media because there's been a lot of questions I've seen about this product. So we brought some of those questions in as well, so we can have him answer those. So, you know, maybe your question is going to be one that Alan answers in just a second. But first, big shout out to our awesome sponsors over at Green Bros, home of the world's premier dry harvesting solutions. From small scale cultivations all the way up to your largest commercial grows, Green Bros dry trimmers, trichome extractors, destemmers, sorters, precision batchers, you know, rosin presses, anything you need for harvest, Green Bros has it. Check them out, greenbros.com, or call 844-DRY-TRIM to schedule a demo in your area today. That's 844-DRY-TRIM. Okay. At long last, Alan Novotny, founder and CEO of Purogen. You can check them out, purogen.com. They are inventing, advancing, and improving. Alan, big intro there. How are you, man? Thanks for joining us on the show. I know you're a busy guy.
Great, Tim. Thank you.
I'm pumped to have you on the show, man. Okay, for those listening at home, just to let you all know, Alan is an expert in the field of human tissue for transplantation and medical sterilization techniques. Okay, he's not a guy who came from the cannabis industry who said, I'm going to put this machine together and hopefully this works. He's a guy who comes from a different medical industry with a huge medical background we're going to dive into. So when we talk throughout this podcast, keep in mind, this guy's smart. He's been doing it a long time, and he knows what he's talking about. We're dealing with the cannabis industry, and to be honest, no one ever takes anything at face value in the cannabis industry, but I can tell you this guy's qualified, and he knows what's going on. Alan, before we get to the box and what it can do, tell me about your background. I just hit on it a little bit, but you come from the medical world. Can you share some about that?
Sure. So I've spent the last 22 years of my life in the transplant tissue arena. I owned a facility which had a 25,000 square foot clean room and laboratory in which we would take in cadavers and we would disarticulate the cadavers. We would fashion them and remove the bone, the skin, the tendons, and various parts and make implants out of them. So if you know anybody who's ever had a cervical fusion or a lumbar fusion or an ACL, a lot of athletes have this done. They use cadaveric tissue. That's what we did. So we had a team of people. We processed a ton of tissue, and human tissue is extremely difficult to sterilize and very dangerous, quite honestly, because it's not like sterilizing, a scalpel. It's a biological entity. And I developed a methodology around sterilization using both supercritical CO2, and then I graduated into reactive oxygen, which is our invention, the reactive oxygen process. The reason I did that was that the supercritical CO2 required a parasitic acid to become a strong sterilant, and irradiation basically damage the biomarkers of the human tissue. So when you irradiate a product, you're actually affecting the entire DNA of the product. And in the cannabis world, one of the things that I've been hearing a lot back from Canada, at least, is that it greatly affects the terpene and the appearance of the flower itself. With the reactive oxygen, the reason it was designed for human tissue is that it had zero impact. So it was basically like an organic oxidation using a vaporized product that under a vacuum penetrates the entire product. Now in flower, when you have a pathogen, if you have mold, it starts from the inside of the bud to the outside. So that by the time you see it on the outside of the flower, it's typically could be very contaminated. And that's why this process is so powerful, because it pulls a vapor through the flower itself and cleaning it. But I sold that business about 5-6 years ago, and about 3 years ago, I heard about a man in California who actually died from inhaling contaminated flower. He was an HIV patient. He had very low immune system. And when I heard that, I knew that, I could help. Because I've had so much experience in sterilization. So we've been studying the effects on cannabis for the past 2 years, and we've concluded, and now we've launched commercially in the United States and Canada.
And so when you start in the medical field years ago, you must have had no idea that the cannabis industry would be, where you'd end up 20 years from then, right?
Well, yeah, there was no cannabis industry, right? So I would never imagine in a million years that I'd be in the cannabis industry, but there's a lot of science to be had, and there's a lot of contribution that I feel that we can give to the marketplace. Not only giving a safer product, but even a better product. When you remove all the pathogens out of flower, and if you like flower, the smoking experience is exceptional. It's the smoothest draw and smoke you'll ever experience because it's absolutely clean to the core. So, I'm looking at really, I can see some really high-end products coming out of this, taking a really high-end bud and then treating it, even though it's not contaminating, but treating it to give that absolute excellent experience for smooth smoke.
So we're talking about the box, which is your flagship product. It's the one that I led off, the top of the show, mentioning everything that it can do. The technology itself came from the medical field, but this box was specifically designed for the cannabis industry, correct?
That's right. That's right. So we've been using this process for many years. We had to reformulate it for cannabis. We had to change some of the design parameters for cannabis. Because of it's just a different product handling methodology. But the genesis of the process is exactly the same. It's vacuum injected vapor under time duration, a cleansing step, and you're done. The whole process in the box for sterility is around 17 minutes based on load. And for rehydration, it's 7 minutes, and for infusion, it's 7 minutes.
Wow, that's super fast. Now, when you talk about bringing this technology to the cannabis space, before that, let's talk about your past technology. How hard in the medical field is it to create a new technology for sterilization like you did? And then do you have to get certification? Do you have to get approval for using it? How does that all work? Because people in the cannabis space, they need to know that this box comes with a lot of technology that's been certified well outside the cannabis space, and the medical space is so much more strict.
Oh yeah,
in the cannabis space.
It's a great question. So so when you develop anything in the medical space, it is the absolute toughest environment in the world to develop in. So they won't let you do anything unless it's inspected over and over and over and validated, and the FDA has to sign off of it, and every state that you actually provide product has to sign off on it. So in healthcare, not only do you deal with the FDA, you deal with the state of Florida, California, New York. You deal with the Canadian Ministry of Health. You deal with the Turkish Ministry of Health, Argentina, all these different countries. Imagine every single country has its own quality mandates, and you have to meet every single one of those quality mandates in healthcare. So it's not just you have to meet your processing in California, so you have to meet California. You've got 30, 40 regulatory bodies that have to go through the process and make sure that it meets their standards for healthcare, which we successfully did for many, many years.
Now it's accredited to our listeners. You can hear, the process that it had to go through initially before it even got into the cannabis space, this technology. So Alan, when you bring it into the cannabis space, performing an action like sterilization, I guess let's talk about that first, the remediation, the sterilization. Compare that to the human tissue you were sterilizing before. How much tougher is it to do human tissue versus cannabis, or is the process basically the same?
Technically, from a developmental standpoint, human tissue is much more difficult because you have a bone and tendon that you're dealing with. From an operational standpoint, it's identical. You're pressing the start button and the process, goes. But from a developmental standpoint, cannabis is much easier to treat because honestly, it's very consistent. So you have a very consistent moisture level range of anywhere from 10 to 18%. The flower is almost identical. So that's a very constant. You don't have varying degrees of density in the chamber. For instance, when you have a BTB in there, which is a bone to bone, it's a patella tendon. You have a piece of tendon, but on each side of it, you have cortical hard bone. So writing a treatment schedule for both hard bone and tendon is extremely complicated versus just the cannabis flower. You just want to make sure that you treat it so that it doesn't affect any terpenes, profiles. It doesn't affect the look. And it comes out better than when it goes in.
Alan, how does someone like you end up going into this sort of field? Was the medical field something you always wanted to do, or did you discover, hey, I wanted to work with tissue one day?
No, I've always wanted to be, and my first job was selling HIV testing kits when I was 24 years old, a long time ago, 25 years ago. And From there, I got into human tissue because honestly, human tissue at that time was very much like cannabis. It was completely unregulated when I got into it, believe it or not. So I watched an evolution in human tissue that's mirroring in cannabis. So when I first started in human tissue, the FDA wasn't even involved. States weren't even involved. It was a self-regulated thing. What happened was somebody had hepatitis and died. And Congress got together and said, we can't have this. We've got to start regulating. And that's when the FDA got involved. So when I first got in it, it was zero regulation. When I got out of it, it was the absolute maximum regulation. And I saw that growth the entire time. I mean, in my Orlando lab alone, I had 54 employees. 30 of them were dedicated to quality assurance. 30. That's more than half of my staff at one location just to handle quality and compliance. And I don't want to scare anybody, but I do see that for cannabis if everything goes rec nationwide and we're allowed to ship product nationwide. What people are going to need to understand is that once that does happen, if you're in California and you want to ship to Colorado, you're going to have to meet both of those criteria the same way we did. So incorporating, really good quality processes and technologies like the box just puts you so much further ahead when regulatory start clamping down more and more and more.
Alan, let's talk about what the technology of the box is, and then I want to talk about you bringing it to market in that process. But talk about the remediation side, and let's get nerdy for the growers who want to know specifically how this happens.
Okay, so
give me the whole process.
Okay, so the flower is dried. Okay, so it's after it's hung, it's after it's dried, preferably after it's trimmed. You could put any type of flower in it. You could put the trim in there separately. You can put it all in there together. But typically you'd want to trim it and then put the flower inside of a package that we have that's designed for gas vapor sterilization. You put the package, 5 pounds of them, into the chamber. You press the start button, and 17 minutes later, you pull your packages out, and they're done. So it's pretty easy. As long as you leave the product inside of the disposable packages, that product will stay sterile. It'll stay clean. So you won't have to. So
that's a sealed package you're talking about?
Yeah, it's a sealed package. So when you put it into the machine, it's sealed, completely sealed, and the way it's treated is that one side is made of a specialty Tyvek material that is only breathable under a certain amount of torr pressure. So at atmospheric, it's not breathable at all, but under a torr, it allows vapors to pass through the packaging, and that's how it's sterilized. So when you bring it back up to atmosphere, you've got a sterile and stable product in the package.
So how does it actually remove the mold? Because it goes down to like the molecular level, right? The reactive oxygen goes in there. Almost paint a picture for me, if you could, of how that works.
It destroys DNA. So what happens is it's an oxidative effect on the DNA itself. Okay, so this is how a lot of the PCR testing that's now starting to come out in cannabis, thank God, is going to be testing for DNA instead of the standard plating that a lot of the industry does. We don't even use plates in healthcare anymore because they're so unreliable. We only use PCR testing for HIV and a variety of everything, basically, that's important. It's a PCR test.
And what is PCR?
PCR is the DNA strain itself.
Okay.
So it's a type of test that tests for the remainder of DNA. Very, very specific, very sensitive.
So now reactive oxygen is something that I've looked up, and I know that it can be dangerous. I've read it can be toxic if ingested. Obviously, if you're dealing with tissue sterilization or someone smoking something that went through this machine, you have to address that so that you're not putting tissue in someone that has some sort of traces of a dangerous reactive oxygen, or you have to take it away from the flower so that, there's no reactive oxygen that people are smoking. So how does that happen? Like, how are you able to use the reactive oxygen to get rid of the mold or microbials and then suck it all out to where the product is now out and it's safe?
Okay, so that's a great question. So in its liquid state, okay, it's very powerful. but we don't use a liquid state to treat the flower. We use a vapor. Okay, so what you have concentration-wise in a liquid state, when it hits the flower itself, that concentration becomes less than 2%. Okay, so it's very, very small amount, but it's very lethal in very, very small amounts in vapor. As soon as the reactive oxygen returns to atmospheric pressure, it breaks up into pieces and it no longer has its potency. And the byproducts are water and oxygen. So it's very, if you want to call it an organic process, it's about as organic as you can get. But in the liquid state, yeah, it's very potent. It'll burn your fingers and, not seriously, but, you'll have like a hydrogen peroxide burn on your fingers. But in the vapor state, it's very small amounts. And then that's dissipated into moisture, into water and oxygen at the end of the process cycle. Now, in healthcare, we actually had to prove to the FDA its safety, right? Not only the efficacy, but the patient safety. So we've done many what's called in vivo systemic toxicity testing. Systemic toxicity means, is it poisonous to anybody? And what you do is back then we would take bone, we would treat it, and we would take that bone, you would insert it into a rat. Okay, that's in vivo, which means in body. Not in vitro is in plastic, in vivo is in body. And you would study the rat. At the end of the study, you would show how many rats had any kind of reaction to what you were treating. And that's what we had to do with the FDA to make it legal to sterilize human tissue with. Of course, everything passed because there is nothing left over. We don't use any kind of ethylene oxides or parasitic acids or anything that is a true lethal sterilant that they can use on equipment.
And I think that's very important to point out, because not only have we already mentioned that this technology was brought over from the human tissue sterilization field, we've talked about how the FDA has been involved in approving all of this, and then you bring that to cannabis. So it has that pedigree with it. Alan, I also had a comment come in through Instagram, and it said, reactive oxygen. This is interesting. I want to get your take on it. Reactive oxygen also contributes to atmospheric ozone, which can be dangerous and damaging on the whole. If you can show that the species decomposition is environmentally sustainable and safe for operator and workplace health, I would be interested in this product. Now, I'm a layman, no idea what to even say to that, but okay. What would you say to that?
Well, I'm not really sure what he's talking about, because reactive oxygen is our proprietary methodology. I think he's talking about something else from Google. But, the byproducts of the process is water and oxygen. There is no contribution to ozone degradation or anything. I'm not sure what reactive oxygen he's talking about, but our brand name, Reactive Oxygen, does not do that.
Exciting stuff. Now let's get nerdy on the specs, like the capacity. You mentioned the 5 pound the 5 pound capacity, 7 minutes for rehydrating, 7 minutes for infusing, I think 7 minutes for the remediation. Are you finding that is the size level that your clients are currently able to bring into their operation? Are you thinking about building multiple capacity levels of machines? Where are you on that?
Yeah. So and it's 17 minutes for purification, by the way. You said
okay.
7. But right now it's designed for the people who grow anywhere from 500 to 2,500 pounds a month. Okay. So we've been talking to Canadian groups that are growing 25,000 pounds a month. So the capacity that we're working on right now is a 4-chamber unit where it looks kind of like a refrigerator, but with 4 individual, look at microwaves, right? Kind of like that. And then you would load the top one, shut the door, hit the start, prep the second one, and the computer will control which chamber is in what state. And you can daisy chain those. So you can put as many of those in a line as you want to do. And it's kind of our workaround for the really big grows who have a big need for whether it's infusion or purification.
Oh, that's a great idea, and I'm glad you guys have addressed that because I've heard that as a concern as well. Tell me about your technology in the box and maybe how it compares to what else is out there. Is there anyone doing what you're doing specifically? And then, if not, how are other companies approaching this idea, if they are, of trying to save harvests? And what is the box? How's the box better or different?
I think that there are a couple of technologies out there trying to address the sterilization. However, the methodologies to me are not applied properly. So ozone, for instance, is a great sterilization technology. I used to use them in my clean rooms. Okay. Ozone is great for surface decontamination. If you have stainless steel tables, there are air conditioners that have, like my air conditioner has an ozone generator built into it that kind of helps clean the system and clean the air in the house. The big problem with ozone is that it doesn't have any kind of surface penetration. So if you have, a 500,000 CFU situation on your hand, pathogens, surface decontamination is just not going to cut it for you. The other drawback for like an ozone technology would be the terpenes. So ozone was developed to really not only deactivate microbes, but they use it in mold remediation to get rid of the mold smell in your house. So that's the whole, genesis of it is I want to get this scent out of my house. I want to get the bad smell out. We use ozone. So that's in my opinion, a drawback of the technology. And there's some other technologies out there as well that I don't know a whole lot about. There's some microwave technologies that I'm not that crazy about. But this, what we're talking about with the box has been used for so long that reapplying it in the cannabis industry was just really, it was just all about making sure that cannabis was better, not worse than coming out. But I really believe there's nothing like this in the cannabis space. I think it's going to be from that MJ BizCon show in November, we're swamped right now.
Alan, something else I'm really interested about is reaction I've seen on social media. Some people have said, oh, now people can take terrible flower and improve it and make it to market. And a big distinction I think that pops up in my head is your box isn't changing the flower that's going in. It's not affecting it at the DNA. It's not affecting the terpene. So if you're putting in quality flower that's, maybe got mold on it, it'll come out as quality flower. But if you put in bad flower, it's coming out as bad flower, right? You're not improving or degrading the quality of the flower, are you?
Yeah, actually, you can improve it. So if you have bad flour, let's say you have flour that has no smell, and let's say it's all dry, well, you can rehydrate it and you can infuse it with a terpene profile and make it smell as skunky as you want, or you can make it smell like a peppermint, candy cane, or orange crush. So you can improve the quality of the flower by putting it through the process, yes.
Now, does that affect any sort of THC content or CBD content or anything like that? Or is that something infusible? Like, how does that work?
No, you can't infuse the THC because it just requires too much of it, and it's just not financially viable. But those are the first markers that we studied was THC and CBD and about 26 different terpenes, because we knew that the sterilization would be very effective, but we weren't sure how it would affect THC and the CBD. Honestly, we didn't know. So we've done just I don't know how many hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pounds, and done so much lab testing on those bioindicators to make sure that it does not affect those important bioindicators. It's like in human tissue, when you take a piece of human tissue, there's two qualifications to quantify the implant performance, and that's osteoinductivity and osteoconductivity. Okay, that's the ability for the bone to tell your bone to start growing, and conductivity is to offer a path to grow through, kind of a matrix. When you irradiate bone, you reduce that osteoinductivity and osteoconductivity by about 30%. Okay. When you pass it through reactive oxygen, there's 0% effect. So that was one of the huge benefits for our product globally, that we were sought after by high-end athletes, and the top-of-line surgical centers wanted our product because it had that extra punch. So knowing how important bioindicators are, when we got into the cannabis world, we knew they were out there. We knew it was THC, but we didn't know anything else, you know. So we basically talked to a bunch of people and learned what all those bioindicators were, and we tested for all of that to make sure that we didn't impact it, so we didn't invest another, $1.5 million in something that's going to damage product.
Again, want to let you know this podcast brought to you by our awesome sponsors over at Green Bros, home of the world's premier dry harvest technology. Hit them up, 844 Dry Trim, to schedule a demo in your area today. You can check them out, greenbros.com. Dry trimmers, they just came out with their new Model M dry trimmer, which is completely surgical stainless steel. Very easy to break down, put back together. Head over to @GreenBros, across social media, and you can see some videos of their CEO, Cullen Reichert, talking about the new Model M trimmer while out at MJ Biz. We had a chance to interview him out there. Trichome extractors, destemmers, like I said, sorting machines, which have taken off here in late 2018, early 2019. Hit them up, 844 Dry Trim. Schedule a free demo in your area today. We're talking with Alan Novotny, founder and CEO of Purogen. Again, you can check them out, purogen.com. I will put the link to the site in the description of the podcast below so you can check it out. They are inventing, advancing, and improving. Alan, when you're going through this whole process, was it difficult to find enough flower to sit there and be able to run test after test? I mean, you're out in Florida. I can't imagine it was always easy.
Yeah, it's not easy. It's a very difficult sector to develop in, because we don't own a grow facility. So it's not like somebody can ship it to us and we can test it, and, or even go down the street and buy some and come back and test it. And, it's an extremely difficult environment to develop when you have to work with real flower. So what we did was we've been working with different facilities across the country, where we would ship one of our boxes in and just do live testing there, in their facility. So they're, a licensed facility that we can do all the, we did it all right. The same way that we would help people do validation work, especially in Canada. We've even started working on preliminary IQ, OQ, PQ validation paperwork to help them place this machine in place and get up and running really quick.
Alan, I imagine people must have thought you were crazy at first when you said, okay, I want to stop what I'm doing here in the medical field. People get paid very well in the medical field. It sounds like what your design was and your technology was something that people needed and were probably buying a lot of. So when you say, okay, no, let's go into the cannabis space, let's do that. What were the reactions like around the room when you're telling these people at your company, this is where we want to go?
Surprised, and I actually sold that company and started a new company, which is Purogen. But yeah, I mean, especially my family was very surprised. It's odd. I have a 9-year-old daughter. I tell her that I'm in the flower business because I don't know what else to say, I'm in sterilization, but I never thought I'd be here in a million years, but I can tell you it's a lot of fun. It's a really cool industry, and I really like the people. It's a lot less stiff than what I'm used to working with orthopedic surgeons, that's for sure.
But at the same time, you go to an orthopedic surgeon with this technology, you say, okay, it's been through the FDA. They don't have questions in terms of it passing clearances. No. You bring it into the cannabis industry, and that is a show me, don't tell me atmosphere for sure. And I think justifiably so. I mean, a lot of people have stood up for the industry being that way because they've been taken advantage of by a lot of shisty people bringing stuff to market that said they could do this or said they could do that. So I know you get the reaction that you're not used to because this field isn't used to being brought technology by people like you that have that accreditation. So how do you deal with that?
Yeah, it's very frustrating. I'll be honest with you, and even for the first year and a half, and even today, I'll hop on a conference call. Somebody will want me on a call, and they just don't believe you. And especially, I guess it's just the industry itself. And like you said, I'm used to coming from a field where, you wrote a white paper and that was the truth, especially if it's peer reviewed. I mean, there's nothing else, people know it's true. And I think that from what I've heard in sterilization, at least in this field, there was there's equipment out there. People spent a lot of money and then they got stuck with some pretty big paperweights. And now they just don't believe people. And, I understand it and respect it. But, from a scientist's point of view, it's frustrating because I take a lot of pride in our statistics and our facts and the thoroughness of our work, because I apply the same principles as human tissue and cannabis. We don't cut any corners. We use all the same materials, all the same ultra high-end products. I even brought in all the medical packaging that we use in human tissue, which is far more expensive, into this sector than going with a cheaper one, because it's just the best packaging out there. So I think that 12 months from today, and having 25 people using this, it's going to be a whole different world. But yeah, being an entrepreneur in the cannabis space with something unique is very challenging.
And I tell you what, Alan, I think it might even happen faster than that. I mean, really, you just get a grow or two that is very well respected in a specific state, a specific area. They bring in your technology. They show people that they can use it. You make one video. I mean, that's it. I've worked with Green Bros a long time in terms of them sponsoring this podcast and on various projects. They're in a similar boat where every piece of equipment they have that comes out is a show me, don't tell me reaction. And that's how they've approached it. They've gotten those testimonials from really reputable names, and from there, products are able to take off. So I mean, I think the sky is the limit with this sort of technology, and it's really the reason why I've wanted to get you on this podcast. I'm glad we're doing it. So you decide to bring this machine to market. You're ready to go. You have a couple of units you can go and sell. Where do you start? You're not a cannabis guy. I don't imagine you had a ton of contacts. So where do you go?
Well, the MJ BizCon generated a tremendous amount of leads. We've sold 2 machines. I just placed the very first machine right before Christmas, so that's in use. And I think we've got 2 in Canada that are going in. And like you said, it's one at a time. And by the time you hit, maybe number 5, they're big enough users that all of a sudden people start believing that it really works. And that's all it's going to take. I don't know how long that's going to take, but I know that that's all it will take, is having, like you said, the strategic people using it and saying, yeah, it's great. And then it's done, from there on out.
Just a couple more questions for Alan Novotny, the CEO of Purogen. Again, Purogen.com. They're inventing, advancing, and improving. Alan, I want to get to a couple of questions I pulled off of social media. Like the last one I asked you, I don't know much about the product in the box and this technology, so if it's off base, feel free to say it's off base. Doesn't matter. One that came in is, how is it able to be how is it able to achieve such a thorough decontamination, or how could such a thorough decontamination occur without harming the terpene profile or the cannabinoid profile? Can you talk on that?
Well, I think we talked about how it happens via the vacuum and vapor. And the reactive oxygen is in just enough concentration to destroy DNA, but without destroying THC. I can destroy THC if I would choose to. So that was the balance. The balance is, how do you not affect a terpene? How do you not affect trichomes under too severe of a vacuum? How do you not affect the THC but still have a DNA kill for pathogens? And that was what it took a year and a half to figure out. I can tear it up if I want to. I can destroy everything in that plant if I want to. So the magic is what is the absolute minimum kill rate for pathogens without affecting it, and that's what we have perfected over the past year and a half. It's a developmental process. We didn't just walk up and say, hey, it works perfectly. It took a lot of R&D.
And that's the secret sauce, people listening at home or having these questions. That's the secret sauce. That's the reason. Alan, is this technology patented or patentable?
Oh, yes. Yeah, we started our patent work in 2017.
See, and another reason why I know you're not a cannabis guy, because you approached it the right way and got the patents right away. But that's the secret sauce, and that's the reason you have to buy, a product like this from a company like this, because they have figured it out. Now, Alan, are there any sort of anecdotal tests or studies you've done? I've heard instances where you've brought, flower from the box and flower, maybe before the box and had people smoke them or something like that, and they can tell like a taste difference. Have you done anything like that?
Oh, we have. We've done that out in Las Vegas, where we had like a private tasting, and we had standard flower, we had infused flower. I had one that was a Christmas cookie, I had one that was a lemon, and one that was a peppermint, I believe. And then we had some standard flower, and we gave out samples to 100 people who all tried it, and were surprised on how much they loved it. So when you do smoke, let's say the peppermint, for instance, for the infusion, one of the weird byproducts that I didn't expect is that if I do a strong infusion of peppermint, not only does it smell like a peppermint, and not only does it taste like a peppermint, but when you smoke it, there's no smell of cannabis. So they were standing out front of the hotel, and everybody was tasting it, but you couldn't smell the cannabis. All you smelled was peppermint, candy cane, all these weird smells. So that might be a benefit as a kind of a discreet thing. If you want to smoke flower and you're on your back porch and you don't want your neighbors to look at you funny, perhaps, I don't know, then it is a nice discreet way to smoke flower, still have the flower experience with all the different bioindicators, but mask it with something new, something different.
Know what I love about this, and we've talked about the remediation, I think that makes this product alone worth the cost of buying it, but infusing I think is so nuts, because you could be a company that has multiple strains that are very popular, maybe a tangy, maybe something that goes with peppermint, maybe a sour diesel, and you can say, oh man, maybe I want to do a Christmas batch of peppermint, orange, tangy, or whatever you want to do. You can go and create custom profiles that other places can't necessarily duplicate, because these grows they have strains. It's impossible.
It's impossible. I mean, honestly, I know that there's been a lot of attempts to alter with essential oils and spritzing it on the flower, but what happens is as soon as you light it, you're burning the tar, and it's nasty. One of the other things that we're working on from a nutraceutical perspective, because of my medical background, I always like to figure out how to increase health and how to help patients, which is really what got me into the sector. The peppermint and all that stuff is just fun stuff for me. But one of the infusion processes that we're just starting to study is the ability to take a sativa and infuse a theacrine into it. So we'll take a nutraceutical, a liquid theacrine, something or L-theacrine, something that you would drink in a sports drink to give you energy, and now infuse that into a sativa. So now you have a sativa that gives you a lot more energy. Or conversely, let's take an indica and hit that with theanine, right? So theanine, I actually take theanine when I drink coffee, because if I drink too much coffee, it gives me the jitters, it gets me a little anxious. Well, theanine stops that from happening. It's also a component in green tea. So it's got a really nice calming effect. So if you take an indica and you infuse it with theanine, well, now you've got a super flower. So there's really some neat science from a medical perspective that we're going to start developing now that we've got this all done, to figure out what all those different nutraceutical combinations can be.
So you mentioned the spritz of people just spraying terpenes or spraying flavors or essential oils on flower, and that you'd basically be burning tar. Tell me how this is different, because I know we're going down to the molecular level of, tell me what is the infusion? Is it a liquid? Is it a vapor? And then it goes into the actual flower and becomes part of its DNA, or how does that work?
Part of the flower. That's why when you would take, let's say, something infused with whatever the scent is, let's just say peppermint, because we're talking about peppermint. When you actually break the flower, the bud up, you get a poof of peppermint. Because it's through the entire flower. Technically, how that works is you start with a liquid. You take the liquid, you turn it into a vapor. You take the vapor and you pull it really fast with a vacuum into the flower. And that's how it works. And then you leave it there. So there are a couple of steps in the reactive oxygen that we do a cleansing stage, that we really pull down a really hard vacuum and then bring it to atmosphere, and then another really hard vacuum and bring it to atmosphere, just to make sure there's nothing left in the flower at all. Just a nice cleanup. With the infusion and rehydration, we don't do that. So what we do is we inject whatever we want to inject at the intensity, and then we let it sit and hang there and kind of marinate, and then we stop the process.
And that would be the difference in the time between 7 minutes for the first two and remediation, which is at 17 minutes.
Exactly right.
So is there a cleaning process for this machine? If they're in a vacuum sealed bag, I would imagine the inside of the machine must stay pretty clean, right?
The inside of the machine will have exposure to vapor, and each one of the flavors has its own alcohol cleaning process. So if you want to let's say you want to go from peppermint to orange, then you would hit the clean mode, and the alcohol would purge that particular vaporizer of peppermint. And what happens is it vaporizes the alcohol the same exact way, and by doing that, it cleans the vaporizer in the chamber, and then you can move on to the next vaporizer.
So you're not even like putting elbow grease in. You're basically just on a cleaning setting, like a self-cleaning oven almost.
It's kind of like a self-cleaning oven.
That's amazing.
Yes.
Now let's see. Last Instagram question: can I infuse ground products as opposed to whole flower or pre-rolls? Which is interesting. I didn't even know that. Can you put pre-rolls in a vacuum sealed bag and infuse? And can you do trim?
We've already done it. And yes, you can do trim. You could do keef if you wanted to. But we've actually, here at our shop, we've actually been infusing cigars and cigarettes because we don't have pre-rolls. So I've been able to take a cigarette and completely remove the cigarette smell and make it smell like whatever I want it to smell like. But yes, we have done pre-rolls as well. So we put bundles of pre-rolls in and infuse them all. It's cool because not only are you infusing the flower, but you're infusing the paper. And, in the cigarette industry, when you buy a menthol cigarette, there's no menthol in the tobacco or the paper. All the menthol is in the little filter itself. So we're doing it even differently from the cigarette industry and infusing the actual tobacco and paper of the product.
That's nuts. So is there any interest in Purogen moving towards the cigarette or cigar industry with this kind of technology in the future?
Oh, yes.
Did I just allude to something? My last question was going to be, what's the future like for the box? You already talked about a larger capacity model with multiple storage areas, and it could be daisy chains to fit any real size of cultivation. But tell me what the next year and 5 years looks like for Purogen.
Well, I think the next year is going to be concentrating in the cannabis sector, working out any kind of bugs that we don't see right now, that are revealed in a full-blown production setting of 25,000 pounds a month. And once we are confident of that, then we'll expand into full botanics and tobacco. So that's a whole nother larger scale setting, but we're not really attacking that until we master the cannabis world first.
Now,
too much to go on.
Too much to go on. And I know it's got to be tough to stay in all these different areas and stay up to date on what's going on in all of them. But obviously with the end of 2018, the Farm Bill passing, legalizing hemp, and so now hemp CBD and more CBD products. Hemp is molecularly extremely similar to cannabis. It's really just a male-female distinction. What sort of interest do you guys have in just approaching the CBD market and hemp manufacturers? Would that be easier? Is that in your plan?
Yeah, so I don't know a whole lot about the hemp market per se. We have been approached by a few people in that marketplace, but really we will go into it. But right now we're just focusing in cannabis because you've got only so many hours in a day, and it's hard when you get too distracted and you spread yourself out too thin. That's when you start dropping balls. So we don't want to drop any balls.
Alan, have you been able to grow this company as fast as you've wanted to, or as fast as you think it's been able to grow, or has it been something
No,
that's taken time?
no, to date, no, I have not. I'm disappointed in the slow growth, and the slow growth is the the market not believing what will happen. But now that we've got our first machines out there in the field working, we got a couple of really big players that are signing up right now out of Canada. Once that happens, and by the way, we've already presented about 2 weeks ago. We presented the technology to the Canadian Ministry of Health, which I have a tremendous amount of experience with. They approved the process in Canada, and I can tell you that from a healthcare regulatory perspective, Canada is worse than the FDA. So Canada is known worldwide to be the toughest regulatory compliance arena to operate in. But I'm very familiar with the Canadian Ministry of Health and their processes. But we wrote a white paper just for them, and they gave us the nod that it looked good, just bring it in and validate it. And once it's validated, the companies can start implementing it in their processes immediately. And that will all really help us with compliance down here in the States. So it's all worthwhile. It's all time that's really well spent.
Al, I can't agree more. I mean, I've had the fortunate ability to go up to a couple of large grows in Canada and shoot some film and do some interviews, and the cleanliness level up there at your average grow is miles ahead of the high-end grows down in the U.S. You'll see guys processing flower with no gloves on down here. Whereas in Canada, you're in a full body getup with a hairnet, with gloves. You have to scan in and out of every room. They need to know exactly where you are at every moment, where every ounce of flower or every gram of flower is. And I think the industry's in for a big shock once, eventually federal legalization is going to happen.
When FDA gets involved, people are going to be in for a huge shock. But the Canadian environment is the environment I'm used to working in. Yeah. So our clean rooms were actually, they were a little bit more tougher than what they have in Canada because we didn't have plant matter. It was a lot cleaner. But you're right. Sometimes I will cringe sometimes walking through some of the grows in the States because I see why they're having cross-contamination problems of mold and pathogens. And it costs a lot of money, honestly. Those Canadian facilities are a lot of money. And you got to have that kind of capital to keep a sterile environment. But even all of that money they spend, they still have problems with remediation as well.
And anyone who's ever grown, whether it's at home, I mean, growing up, once I got old enough in high school and college, my dad felt comfortable. He had a little 9-10 plant grow at our house. And so I kind of grew up in a sense in my adult life around it. And I saw just at a home level how he would deal with these microbials, mold, all this stuff. It was a constant game of staying an inch in front of it and then playing catch up once you get behind it. Yeah. Anyone that's ever grown can tell you that there's a lot of factors that aren't necessarily in your control. And something like this, the ROI on it, if you can save 1 or 2 harvests, and we're not even talking about thousands of pounds, we're talking about hundreds of pounds. If you can do that once, you've paid for a technology like this.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, without any question. The payback on this on a typical, $750 a month grow is 30 days.
And that's just remediation. So now then you talk about rehydration and infusion, and you could almost have a whole separate product that just does that. And that would be worth the price of admission for a lot of the grows. I mean, Alan, I feel like we've hit on everything I've wanted to. Is there any common question that you get or anything like that when you're, on these phone calls or conference calls you're chimed into that you are just a broken record and sick of answering? Is there anything that sticks out in your mind that you'd like to address or bring up?
One of the things that we're standing behind right now for some of these first few, I guess you call them risk takers, to get involved is, we're giving them a guarantee that for any reason whatsoever, they don't like the machine, we take it back. So we're doing that just to get some key people. We want 4 or 5 key groups. We've got one right now across the country to kind of prove this methodology out. So that seems to make a lot of people feel good that, that's the kind of confidence that I have based on my data and based on what I've seen over the past year and a half, that I'm that confident to say that if in it doesn't matter for any reason whatsoever, for a few people, we're putting that guarantee in writing for them.
His name is Alan Novotny. He's the founder and CEO of Purogen. Again, the link to the website's in the description of the podcast below, purogen.com. They are inventing, advancing, and improving now in the cannabis technology. Amazing interview, tons of information. If you know someone at a grow that needs this technology, be sure to shoot them this podcast. It's easier than you explaining it yourself, because I got to be honest, I've tried to explain what this thing does a bunch of times, and I'm just going to start forwarding this podcast to people, and that's the reason why, because I've heard about this technology. People have asked me about it, and I say, you know what? You need to talk to Alan. You need to talk to some of the guys at Green Bros who you're working with, distribution partner for you guys. I don't know how you even came up, or how did you find the guys over at Green Bros to even sell something like this as a part of their
well, it's funny because Green Bros has a distributor somewhere in Europe, Slovenia or something like that. And the guy in Slovenia found us on the web. He called me. We had a great conversation. He talked to Green Bros and said, "Oh my God, you won't believe this technology." And then the Green Bros contacted us, and the rest is history.
Now, they're a manufacturer that has the same show me, don't tell me history of seeing all this stuff and having to prove it. Were they skeptical when you first brought this machine to them?
Yeah, they were. Absolutely. And, they've seen all the data, and they know that, they're pumped up about it. They've seen live data from our first customer out there in the field. So that makes them even more pumped up that we're all going in the right direction. And one of the reasons that I'm working with Green Bros is, it helps us to overcome that, who the hell are you and why should I believe you? So, we figured that if we're working with a reputable group like Green Bros out there in the field that are already dealing with larger facilities, because you have to be a larger facility to buy their equipment, obviously, that it would help us with some legitimacy on, our background of where we come from. So
at least getting that foot in the door. Yeah, I think that's a great call.
It's really helped us a great deal.
Very nice. Alan, I got to get you out here, man, because I got a dozen more questions I could easily fire off at you, but we'll save them for another podcast on another day. Thanks so much for joining us on the show, man. I've really appreciated the time.
You're welcome. Thanks, Tim.
Again, his name is Alan Novotny, founder and CEO of Purogen. Hit up their site to learn more about their machine. You could also hit up greenbros.com. They've got information on the box and some sales managers who can link you up with more questions you might have for Alan, or maybe even find you local cannabis growers that have been lucky enough to grab the first 4 or 5, up to a dozen, I'm sure by no time, boxes to show you this stuff. And keep an eye out in the future for some video from either Green Bros or Purogen and talking about how this box works. Again, big thanks to Alan for being on the show. That's going to do it for us on the show. Thanks for listening, whether it was on iTunes, SoundCloud, or StayRooted.com. Don't forget to check out our TV platform on CannabisClub.tv, High Times TV, or again, our website, StayRooted.com. The full video version of this podcast will be on YouTube. We'll promote that as well. But that's going to do it for us on the show this afternoon. My name's been Tim Strommel, reminding you one more time to work hard, be humble, and of course, stay rooted. We'll see you next week, everybody.